586 BCE. So you'll recall we had the Assyrians in 721, then we had the Babylonians in 586. Okay. I want to start out with a little bit of history, just a short amount, because it's crucial for us to understand how the next communities develop and where they come from. So, in 300, we have Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great spreads through the ancient world and brings Greek everything to the ancient world. We're going to have to talk about that a little bit. In 165, we have the ascent of the Maccabees. It's also the ascent of the Pharisees in our tradition. In 140, I'll explain who this is. Ptolemy invades Judea. In 62, we have the Battle of Corinth, and Rome defeats Greece. And in 40, King Herod is appointed procurator of Judea. Okay, so what happens after 586? The Jews have been expelled from Judah, the intelligentsia of the Jews, the cream of the crop, have been put into exile in Babylon. So we have this Jewish community in Babylon, which we spoke about last week. And as I told you, the Babylonian community was a very large Jewish community up until 1948. And in 1948, as we are going to see today as well, in many cases, Jews were expelled from Arab countries. In some cases, they left on their own. And also, Arab populations in Israel were kicked out. There was a population exchange, basically. And it's hard for us as Jews to sort of, okay, well, we actually did this. And Israel did do it. They kicked out people from the country and they forced them to go somewhere else. It didn't happen quite on the scale that it happened from the Arab countries, but it happened, and we have to own it.
Rabbi, as you know, that takes place in all wars.
Absolutely.
And not just this.
Yes, absolutely. Gary said, as you know, that takes place in all wars, not just this. And that's absolutely 100% true. It is a fact of war. Yes, Cecil.
Actually, there was one example, the opposite. In Haifa, when the Arabs started moving out because of the threats or whatever, the mayor of Haifa went to the Arab community, pleaded with them, stay, and they stayed. And they were safe.
Haifa is kind of a little oasis up in the north.
That's an example.
Yeah, it's an anomaly.
But
It was one of my favorite places to visit. Anyway, okay. So the Jewish community in Babylonia is there, and Cyrus the Great, the Persians invade and defeat the Babylonians. Cyrus the Great becomes the leader, the king of that empire now, the Persian Empire. And he tells the Jews, okay, you can go back to Judah now. It's fine with me. Go build your temple, go worship your God. I don't care what you do, just pay me my taxes. And that was the only time in our history when an invading force allowed us to do that. Everyone said,
I don't know if they can hear you.
can you all hear me?
Well, in streaming, people are.
Oh, in the stream, no problem. No one ever accused me of being soft. So, okay. Sorry for those of you who are streaming. Perhaps you can hear me better now. Okay. So, Cyrus allows the Jews to return. And that was the first time in our history that a king would do that, because the king's requirements were always that we had to bow down to the new king and recognize the new king as the king. Well, for Jews, as you know, and since we just went through the high holidays, we only have one king, right? Hamelech HaKadosh, that we say at the end of the Kedusha during the high holidays. And so we would not bow down to anyone. And that infuriated all the kings before Cyrus. Cyrus had a different model. As I said, he said, I don't care what you do. Go back, build your temple, just go. Just pay me my taxes when I need to pay when you need to pay taxes. And the Jews said, okay, we can do that. And that was the only time in our history when there were no revolts during the Persian conquest. Okay, following the Persian period comes the Greek period. Alexander marches through the ancient world around 300. Again, you'll recall I use round numbers in terms of dates because they're easy to remember. It wasn't exactly 300, but it was right around 300 because that's an easy number to remember. Alexander the Great marches through the ancient world, and he conquers everything, right? He conquers everything. And as he marches through the ancient world, he spreads Greek ideas, Greek everything through the ancient world. We call that Hellenism. And during the Hellenistic period, Alexander the Great marched through what is now Israel, marched through Judah, and the Jews came in contact with Greek stuff. Some of the wealthier Jews especially loved the Greek stuff. They liked gyros, they liked togas, they liked, Greek philosophy, Greek. Up until this time, the Jews had never been exposed to philosophy. There was no endemic Jewish philosophy. So Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, these were just brand new ideas that were brought. And some enough wealthy Jews especially started going the Greek way. As you know, during this period with the Maccabees, there were many Greek last names. Jews had Greek last names. And it became a big problem because Jews were abandoning Judaism in favor of Greek life, and some even worshiping Greek gods. Okay, so that was a huge problem. Hence, we have the genesis of the Maccabees in 165 BCE. The Maccabees were a country group of priests who come onto the scene. They oppose the Greek Seleucids, because this was Syria that was in charge of Judea at the time. We're going to talk about that in a sec. And they revolt. General Ptolemy invades Judea in 140. And in 62, Rome defeats the Greeks. And so the Roman Empire is the next ascendant empire. Okay, this is the history of the period. So now let's talk about the various communities that happened because of that. All right. During this period, most Jews form diasporan communities because they want to. They want to leave. Remember, in 586, they were exiled. So that wasn't voluntary, obviously. However, by the Greek period, we have Jews starting to want to live in other areas. And probably the first big Jewish center that we need to talk about is Alexandria, Egypt, which is right here, right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Here, I'll put it in blue. Those are waves. Okay? Waves. You see, I'm not an artist. I could do lots of things, but drawing is not one of my things. Okay. So, Alexandria, Egypt becomes the first very large Jewish community, and possibly these were Jews who had left Judah and moved into Alexandria. More came when the Maccabees revolt in 165 against Rome, and more come at that time. So Alexandria becomes a huge center for diasporan Jews. In 63, where it says the Battle of Corinth there, the Hasmonean dynasty basically dissolves and Rome takes it over. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Hasmoneans the name comes from a reputed ancestor of the Maccabees, Asmoneus. And so the Hasmonean dynasty is really the Maccabees. And the Maccabees take over around 165 after we have their famous battle on the Temple Mount that we commemorate in Hanukkah. So remember that Hanukkah, the rabbis couldn't celebrate a military victory. They had a problem with that. So they imagined another reason why that day was so important. That God had allowed the candles to burn even though there was only one oil left for one night. And of course that's the story we tell our kids. But the real story of Hanukkah is the military victory of the Maccabees over the Greek Syrians. And and it wasn't a huge military victory. The Maccabees didn't defeat the Greek-Syrian army, not a chance. The Maccabees were tiny. The Greek-Syrian army was enormous. What the Maccabees did was they won a little battle on the top of the Temple Mount, and they got the temple back. For our people, for them, it was huge. And so, good job, guys. But it would take a much, much, much longer time to drive the Greek-Syrian army out. Okay, so Alexander the Great marches through the ancient world. He brings Hellenism. So the Jews, because Egypt here, northern Egypt, was conquered by Alexander the Great, the Jews in Alexandria were speaking Greek. And that was now the major language of Jews throughout the empire. You'll recall Hebrew left a long time ago. Nobody spoke Hebrew anymore. Pretty much after the Assyrian conquest, Hebrew stopped being spoken because the Assyrians spoke Aramaic. And so once the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom is complete, then Aramaic begins to spread, and Aramaic becomes the diplomatic language of the empire, of the Assyrian Empire. By the time the Babylonians come in, Aramaic is still being spoken, and Aramaic is the lingua franca for the entire empire. Hebrew, long time, no more speaking. Which is why Hebrew becomes the holy language of prayer. But nobody spoke it until the late 1800s, when Eliezer ben Yehuda resurrects Hebrew from the grave and creates a new Hebrew, which is an astounding accomplishment to me. I can't even fathom how that happened. However, so we have Alexander marching through, and the Jews come to Alexandria. In Alexandria, the Jews create a Greek version of the Bible because no one's speaking Hebrew anymore. They didn't understand Hebrew. Down the road, what's going to happen is we're going to get a Greek translation and an Aramaic translation called the Targum Onkelos and the Targum Yonatan. And so what would happen is, when the Torah was read, we had somebody translating on the side, either in Greek for Greek-speaking communities or in Aramaic for Aramaic-speaking communities. In the same way that you sit in synagogue now and someone is chanting the Torah, you have no idea what they're saying, and so you're looking at your English in the Chumash, figuring out, oh, okay, this is what's going on today. That same thing happened in the ancient communities. And this new Greek Bible is called the Septuagint. This is really important because the Septuagint is one of the oldest translations that we have. Does that mean 70? 7D. And it means 70 because at the time, the legend is that 70 scholars were put into the room to translate the Bible, and every single one of them came out with the exact same translation. Nope, it's not. Scam likely. Nope, that's not my call. Yes?
I was in a class yesterday where the subject of Jews came up that were doing trading throughout the world, and why the various civilizations like Jews there, because the Jews were able to communicate with people around the world. Was that Aramaic that we're speaking in? And how long has Aramaic actually lasted in the world?
Good. So the answer to that is no, it wasn't Aramaic. That particular situation happens mostly during the Middle Ages. It happens after the year 600 when Islam takes hold in the Middle Ages. And so what happened is you had Jews living under Christendom all throughout Europe, and you had many Jews living in what were what had become lands under Islam, conquered by Islam. And so you had Jews under Islam speaking Arabic. You had Jews under Christendom speaking whatever language of the country that they lived in. But what could Jews always speak to each other? They couldn't speak Hebrew in modern language, but what they could do was communicate with each other in terms of weights and measures and figures. So Jews from the Christian world were able to speak to Jews from the Muslim world, because Christians wouldn't speak to Muslims, and Muslims wouldn't speak to Christians. But each group had their community of Jews, and they said, okay, let's put these guys to use. They can help us facilitate trade between the two areas. So it wasn't Aramaic, it was Arabic. Arabic in Muslim lands, many Jews spoke Arabic. Many Jews spoke Arabic. And, but they could communicate in Hebrew. And they were sought after because of their ability to keep accounts, to do bookkeeping, to communicate with other communities that were forbidden to either Christians or Muslims. Yes? They had a network. Absolutely. So they had a net. Sure.
Okay. What they had was a network or they're Jews along the Mediterranean that that knew each other as families and stuff. So if you were a Christian that needed to deal with, in England, that needed to deal with somebody in Egypt, for saying, they knew each other. There was a Cairo, and you could get your goods sent via the Jews who knew each other, and that's when the loaning stuff, the lending started.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Melinda. Yiddish comes about actually in much more in modern times, as a result of Jews moving from Germany all throughout Eastern Europe. And so Hebrew mixed with Czechoslovakian, mixed with other Slavic languages, as well as German, establishes Yiddish in... Absolutely. Yiddish is a blend of many different languages. Okay, so Aramaic stops being the lingua franca when after Alexander the Great marches through the ancient world, because then Greek becomes the
So
lingua
is it a
franca.
dead language then? It's
Aramaic?
Yeah.
Aramaic now, as far as I know, is only spoken by certain Assyrian communities.
And where are they located?
Oh, we have, they're all over the place. They're here in Southern
Really?
California, yes, small Assyrian churches, yes.
Okay, thank you. Hear you. You
Sure,
may
I
have
don't know where it is
Could you
spoke. Her grandson in Israel studied Aramaic.
Oh, really? Very nice.
You might ask him where is Aramaic spoken as a spoken language? The reason why he's studying Aramaic, absolutely, is to read the Talmud. Because if we look at the Talmud, I know it's a little off track, but the questions come up, so it's good. If you read the Talmud, at the top of the Talmudic page is what we have is called the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is written in Hebrew because it's from an earlier time. So the Mishnah was written, codified around 200 CE. So we're talking over here on the timeline. We have the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is written in Mishnaic Hebrew. People weren't speaking Hebrew, but people could write it. Scholars could write it. And the first set of rabbis, the Tanaim, wrote the Mishnah in Mishnaic Hebrew. By the time the next set of rabbis comes along, the Amoraim, they are writing in Aramaic. So, on a page of Talmud, you have the Mishnah at the top, and then you have all kinds of commentary from the Amoraim in Aramaic. So in order to read the ancient texts, especially the Talmud, you have to know Aramaic, because none of it's Hebrew. Only the Mishnah, the little short box at the top. All the other huge commentaries, everything else is Aramaic. Yes, it's confusing. Which is why when Steinsaltz came along with the English translation, it was, oh, thank you. I'm still amazed. You know, the rabbis of earlier generations, and some now for sure, especially Orthodox rabbis, but the rabbis of earlier generations from JTS, et cetera, could fly through the Aramaic. When I sit with Eli, and he just like, how do you do that? No vowels, just because he did it from when he was like 3 years old. Okay, yes.
Okay. My daughter got a PhD in biblical literature at UCLA, and so she had to study Aramaic. And there's different kinds of Aramaic. The one she studied, of course, was the biblical Aramaic, but depending on which region you came from, it varies. There's a professor at UCLA who wrote a Aramaic dictionary that she studied under. So,
Sure, that's great. And as you know, or may not know, our prayer, Kaddish, Aramaic. It's not Hebrew. It's Aramaic. That's why it sort of sounds like Hebrew, but kind of not. And we have, so like if you are in the Torah service, Baruch Shemei Dalma, that all Aramaic as well. So throughout our Siddur, we have stuff from Hebrew and stuff from Aramaic.
So, who else? I have a question about trope. Is trope used with Aramaic or just Hebrew?
Is trope used with Aramaic or just Hebrew?
I'm just curious. Maybe you don't.
I'm not aware of.
Reading Torah?
Torah Haftarah on the Megillot.
And Nusach, which is the music of prayer, is what would be used, like you have different Nusach for the different Kaddishes. There's the mourner's Kaddish, the reader's Kaddish, the
Kaddish Shalem.
the half Kaddish, each one of those has a different tune, which is Nusach, which is the music
Correct.
we pray.
So the trope is used for chanting specific melodies. The only time, I'm trying to think, and we don't, the only place we have a little bit of Aramaic in our Bible is a tiny bit in Daniel, a couple of words only, which is why we know Daniel, or why we think we know Daniel was one of the last, if not the last addition to the canon, because there are Aramaic words interspersed. But everything that we use trope for is Hebrew. It's basically the Torah and the Megillot, Esther, Ruth, the Canticle of Lamentations, etc. And Joette is correct in that Nusach changes. So, for instance, as Joette said, we have different Kaddishes. Yitkaral v'yikara shemei rabba b'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon. That's one. Yitkaral v'yikara shemei rabba b'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon v'yimachon v'chayidu chol beit Yisrael b'alav. Okay, and then before Musaf, Yitkaral v'yikara shemei rabba b'alma divrach. So, yes. Okay. So, in the Alexandrian population, over the course of history, the Jews of Alexandria, Egypt, the population goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, depending on who is the ruler of the region at the time. During the... here's what I wanted to point out. When Alexander the Great dies, basically his entire empire is taken over by his 5 top generals. 2 of the 5 top generals are really, they emerge as the big fish. You have Ptolemy and you have Seleucus. And there are 3 others, and they have little bits of territory. But basically what happens is, Ptolemy takes the western half of the empire, and Seleucus takes the eastern half of the empire. So, when Ptolemy takes the western half of the empire, all the pharaohs of Egypt come from the Ptolemaic line, meaning all the pharaohs of Egypt are Greek after Ptolemy takes over. So, the last of those Greek pharaohs was Cleopatra. Cleopatra was not Egyptian, she was Greek. and she spoke Greek. And you have Seleucus over here. Now, between the two of them, there is great rivalry. And there is especially great rivalry for what is now Israel. Why? Because as you can see, it's right in the center of all the trade routes. It's right smack in the center of everything. To get to anywhere, you have to go through Israel. So everybody wanted it, and everybody wants it. So Ptolemy, in 140, comes up and takes it. And this is after the as the Maccabees are establishing their power. Seleucus over here in Syria, that's why we have the Maccabees going against the Greek Syrians, because Ptolemy has this. Seleucus wants it. Seleucus then invades and takes it. So by the time we get to the story of Hanukkah, Seleucus, the descendants of Seleucus, because he's dead now, but Seleucus, the Seleucids, they're called, the Seleucids have taken over this area, and they're in charge. And so the Maccabees revolt against them. But earlier, it was under Ptolemy's rule. Okay. Under Ptolemaic rule, earlier, the Jews in Alexandria had to live in assigned separate sections of the cities, the Jewish quarter, and each quarter had a different population, and they were assigned Greek letters. And so the Jewish quarter was called the Delta quarter. Within the Delta quarter, there was a large Beit Din. There was a great synagogue of Alexandria, not a great temple, a great synagogue. And probably one of this population wrote Second Maccabees. So we have two books, Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2. They are not in our canon. They are in what we call the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. The Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha were books, I think we studied them here, but for those of you who weren't in that class, they are books from our tradition that some Jews were reading that for one reason or another didn't make it into the canon. The rabbis didn't deem them worthy of being into the canon. Books like Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and in large respects, the Book of Judith, great story. But in large respects, these books, not Maccabees, but others of the books, there's a lot of angelic both interference and aid to humans in these stories. And the rabbis were very uncomfortable with angels. They were able to deal with them a little bit, but in these stories, in Enoch and Jubilees, we have the angels rebelling against God and coming down and having sex with women on earth and having children called the Nephilim, and that's in Genesis 6. And it's a little section in Genesis 6 that's still preserved, and we have no idea why it's still there, because it makes no sense in the story whatsoever. But if you look back to the earlier tradition, it's like, oh, my goodness. Okay, we had all this craziness, and that's why God destroys the earth. God never says why he destroys the earth. He just says the whole earth was corrupt, and it was bad. There was Hamas, there was chaos. And so the question then is, what could have been so bad? And the rabbis offer a number of different solutions. They say, well, everybody was stealing from everybody else. The men were having sex with the animals were having sex with the men. The people were cruel. They were taking their babies and stuffing them in the crevices of the dams in order to stop the water. But if you look back at just a couple of lines earlier, you'll find out that God destroys the earth because the product of the angels and the humans were Nephilim. They were giants, and they were eating human beings and spilling blood everywhere. And then you kind of go, oh, okay, now I get it. That's bad. That's really bad. Yes, Melinda. Yes, we do. So Melinda correctly says, but don't we say the 3 angels visited Abraham? Yes. The rabbis kept a very short leash on the angels. And the rabbis decided the angels had no ability to decide for themselves what they could and could not do. Unlike Enoch and Jubilees, where they just decide for themselves, you know what, we're just going to, the heck with God. We're going down to earth because we see some beautiful women there, and we're going to have children with them. So the rabbis rein in the power of the angels a lot because they didn't want any kind of a being that could challenge God at all, nothing. So yes, we do, absolutely, we have angels in our tradition. Yes, they are malachim, they're messengers, rather than having the ability to do stuff on their own. And our earlier tradition is full of stuff that would blow you away. I mean, our earlier tradition, we have a minority tradition. The rabbis said, oh, no, but it's in there in the Midrash and the legends that Satan comes and he rides in the form of Samael. He rides on the serpent and seduces Eve and impregnates her. And that's why Cain is born. Because Cain is so evil and Abel is so good, and you figure, how could that possibly have happened? One was so bad and one was so good, because Cain is the result of Samael, Satan, impregnating Eve. And so from that, we get the idea that the rabbis tell us that every nation from Cain is cursed. And from that time on, all of human beings have sin, original sin. And you say, oh my God, what? That's Christian original sin. We don't have that. Well, yeah, we do in the minority tradition. We do. It's there. And how do we get rid of it? At Sinai, we got rid of it. We got rid of the original sin at Sinai. Gentiles still have it because they weren't at Sinai with us. Okay. Yes, absolutely. The Shabbat angels every week, yes. So one of this community in Alexandria probably wrote Second Maccabees. That's a book that didn't get in our Bible, but Jews were reading it because it defends Hellenism. And Second Maccabees. First Maccabees does not. Second Maccabees does. Second Maccabees doesn't have a problem with the high priest. First Maccabees, big problem with the high priest. So they were written by writers from different communities. So once Pompey annexes Judea in 62, under Rome there's persecution by the Jews in Alexandria, because now it's a Roman province. So Alexandrian Jews then go to Rome to flee the persecution. We also have two other really important communities. The first one is called Cyrenaica, which is Libya. It's the eastern half of Libya. And this population probably came from Alexandria earlier, and possibly during commercial pursuits, and some are taken as prisoners during the Maccabean conflicts. So when we have the Maccabean revolts, then some of those Jews were taken from the Maccabees, were taken prisoners, and some of them brought to Cyrenaica. In 1948, many Jews migrated to Israel, approximately 31,000 out of approximately 40,000 Jews, so almost the entire population of Cyrenaica moves to Israel on their own. Before that, there was a large population of Jews in Benghazi. Benghazi rings a bell for you because our American embassy was attacked there, and there was a whole investigation with Hillary Clinton, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So in 1948, Jews migrate to Israel en masse. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, riots break out, and the rest of those Jews leave. Interesting tidbit of information, there are at least 2 books written right now that say unequivocally, according to the books, that Gaddafi had Jewish blood in his line, a distant relative of his mother. So his mother, according to these studies, had Jewish blood, and one of the books says Gaddafi has the right of return to Israel. So I just thought that's an interesting tidbit of information, if it is true.
Well, Rabbi, I have a question. When Gary and I went to Morocco and we listened to the speaker about, our tour guide about the people who had come to Morocco, and this wasn't after the expulsion from Spain, but before, that there were Jews living in the hills and they had crafts. So I just wonder if those Jews had come from Libya to Morocco, because it's there in northern Africa.
Yeah, certainly some of them did, but as you pointed out, this is a little bit later in history, and we'll definitely get to that. So that's really good. Yes, absolutely. The other important Jewish population was on Crete, in Greece. They arrived from Egypt, probably during military campaigns, again, probably during the Maccabean revolt. The book of First Maccabees mentions this community on Crete, and there were a number of thriving Jewish communities on Crete. By the 19th century, there were about 700 Jews, and they were all in a city called Chania, Hania. And as many of you may know, not only Crete, but Greece in general, had a very thriving and big Jewish community. Hitler in World War II wipes out the Jewish community in Greece and Crete. Yeah, at least. Yeah, absolutely. Gary said 90%. Yes, there are no more. And it was a large, thriving Sephardic community. Absolutely. Salonika, absolutely. Yes. Yep. Okay. I think, is it 10:50? I think that. 2 minutes. Okay, good. Jews of Rome. Haha. Okay, after 27 CE, after 27 BCE, after the Battle of Corinth, Rome takes over. King Herod takes over in 40, becomes the king of Judea. Many Jews migrated to Rome from Alexandria. And Pompey, as we said, conquers Jerusalem in 63, and Herod. Some Jews are taken as prisoners during the Maccabean conflicts, and some Jews are taken as prisoners during the Roman conquest. We're going to find out that later on, lots of Jews are taken as prisoners by Rome, possibly to help build the Colosseum. That is a conjecture. We don't know, but possibly. And there have even been conspiracy theories about where did all the gold from Herod's temple go? Did it go to finance building the Colosseum? Is it in the walls of the Colosseum, etc.? Total conspiracy theories. I haven't seen anything to back any of it up, but it's kind of interesting to think about. That's all I could say. And as we move on through Europe in modern times, then we'll get to Italian Jewish communities, and there are many, and large Italian Jewish communities. But that's down the road a little bit. We've made it now to the year 0, and we're going to come into the CEs now, after the year 0, starting next week.
So the depiction on the Arch of Titus,
Yes.
is that from the,
That's after the Second Temple, absolutely. So, Joe, it says the depiction on the Arch of Titus. There is a huge arch, it's called the Arch of Titus, and it shows Jewish prisoners carrying the menorahs being taken into slavery. And so the question was, is that after the destruction of the Second Temple? Yes, absolutely. That was after the destruction of the Second Temple. And the Romans took over, yes. All right, everybody, have a beautiful week, and I will look forward to seeing you next week.
Rabbi, you were going to tell us about your mom. Is she
The what?
your mom? You say she's hospitalized?
Yeah, my mom had a very bad night, maybe 3 days. My mom is 89. And basically can't walk anymore. It's really hard because she was a very go-getter. I mean, she was. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. To use the
oh.
mic, they can't hear it.
Anyway, so when we called the other night, she really couldn't speak and she couldn't move her left arm. And so we thought it was a stroke, and we were all. Anyway, it turns out it's COVID and a really bad UTI. So luckily she was vaxxed a number of times and boosted, so thank God for that. And I spoke to her yesterday. I mean, she was just, hi. She's very weak. But she at least recognized my voice, and she's at Good Samaritan Hospital in San Jose.
Well, all the best to her.
yes,
Well,
thank you,
yeah,
thank
we
you.
wish her a quick recovery.
Hoping for a good result.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. So we'll see you next week. So now we're on break. So, Rabbi, if you want to, Susie's so sweet. If you want to take a cup of coffee or pastry with you, you're welcome to it. If you want something, yeah, go ahead. Okay, we're on break for a few minutes. Oh, it's okay. You run around and work it out. Bye.
smart. That's good. We'll keep it up there. Hey, Esther, how are you? It's nice to see you. You doing okay? All right. Are we ready to start? Is it okay? All right. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or whatever you. I've been up since it's an early morning today, so it's okay. But I hope everyone's doing well. For those folks who are online, you should have the link to. No. Okay. So. Okay, then you'll get the link later. So just follow along, or online you can go to Safaria.org, Safaria.org, and click and under text go to the Babylonian Talmud, Kiddushin 81b. We'll do the best we can. It's Susie. It's hard. I know I only gave it to you like an hour and a half ago. It's hard because I only do it I prepare this in the morning. So you texted me last night. I was still working on last night's class, and then so I did this in the morning. Anyway, if someone are you online right now, Susie? No. Because I just said if someone wanted to email. How many people are online usually? We don't know. Okay, let's not worry about it. If you're online, you'll follow along, and if you're lost, just yell out, and we'll pay a lot of attention. So anyway, we hope everyone is doing well. I hope you are ready to blush, because this one is spicy. All right. So if you wanted spicy text, I entitled this, Tempted by the Fruit of Another. There's that, yeah, exactly. And it is a story of sexuality. It's a story of, it's really a story about sex. That's what we're going to talk about, sex. So I had the opportunity once to teach at the Limud conference in Lithuania. And one of my colleagues did a session on like sex. Everyone showed up to that one, right? Like they were like, "Oh my gosh!" Like I was going to talk about sex. It was like packed out the door. So this is the one we're going to talk about, sex. It's this great little story in the Gemara about temptation and different views of sexuality. And how sex is how sex should be received, and then also about relationship and miscommunication. So it's a great story. If someone was to say to you, "What is the Jewish view of sex?" what would you say? Well, you're twice. Wow, Joette. Joette, woo! So Joette, this is not Brian Schuldenfrei. This is Joette Labinger, Labin. So Joette says twice on Shabbat, but what Joette's getting at is that there seems to be, at least in our, that we would say that we are, that Jews are not prudish, right? That there is an obligation in rabbinic law for there to be a sexual component to a relationship, right? That it's not that we don't shy away from sex, but rather that we embrace sexuality as a normal part, as a normal function of a healthy relationship. Okay, good. Now I don't know about twice on Shabbat, but hey.
It's a tradition, it's a custom, it's understood somewhere.
Yeah. So that Shabbat is definitely a time for it. The amount of times, I don't know, but 2 challahs, but you need. Anyway, I was going to make a little blue pill joke about, anyway. Okay, go ahead, Lana. Yeah.
There's an obligation for the man to provide for his wife sexually, and I think in Christianity, the woman is supposed to be more dutiful to the man. I think that's interesting.
Yes. It still is androcentric, though. Like, the man is still like, the man has the obligation to provide for his life, where, the little wife is like, oh, yes, honey, that's all I want is you. Like, it's still very kind of like, man, providing for his little wife. There is still that element in the rabbinic, but you're right, like, there is, as opposed to in other faith traditions. I'm not an expert on Christianity, so I just sort of hesitate that, but other faiths where we'd say that it's more dutiful, where the wife complies. Actually, in Judaism, one of the reasons that a woman could hope for a divorce is because there's no sexual gratification in the marriage. Now, the man still has to initiate the divorce, but the rabbis could pressure that. But if there is that one of the kind of like the staple, one of the staple elements of a relationship is sex. And so if that doesn't exist, that's grounds for divorce. Okay? All right, anyone else want to opine on sex? Does anyone 3 times on Shabbat? One for every meal. No? Do I hear 4? Rabbi. All right. So this is a great story. Oh, you don't need to share. We should have enough. Okay. All right. So, here we are, and I want to make 2 announcements. Just a few some self-plugging here. 2 announcements. If you are interested in a straight text study, and even if it is, for some of you, maybe difficult to get out during the evenings, Tuesday evenings I do a class, and we are reading through the entire book of Exodus. We have over 40 people registered for the class. It's a great, fun class with really interesting people. Some of you are in that class, some of you are not yet in the class. That's a little pressure there. But if you would like to join that class, there's 2 ways you could participate. You could either participate in person, and if you don't want to drive at night, let me know. If you let me know early, we can arrange someone to come get you. Obviously, if you live in Woodland Hills, good luck Zooming. But if you live in the area, we can have someone come get you, and then or you can just Zoom. And we have this new device that makes the Zoom experience much better. And so we ironed out some of our Zoom issues. So we're reading through the entire book of Exodus, and it's a really fun class. It's Tuesday evenings. If you're interested still in joining, we would love to have you. No, in the Win. Okay, and we'd love to have you. Right now, we've read through the first 4 chapters of Exodus, and I can provide all the materials, and I can actually give you video links to the first 2 lectures. And the classes combine, like this class is more frontal. That class has a chavruta element. Chavruta is paired learning. So I make an introductory comment, and then we have paired learning, and then we have and then I give a lecture. So it's from 6:30 to 8 o'clock on Tuesdays, and it's been really fun and really. Joette, 2 thumbs up. Okay, 2 thumbs up on it. Yeah, yeah. Warren and Melinda are also in it. So we have a bunch of folks here are in that class. But we would love to have you. And again, there's multiple ways of participating. If driving at night is not something you like to do, that's fine. And we can either get you a ride. I'd be happy to try and find that for you. Or you could also Zoom it. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to announce is 2 trips that I don't know if anyone is interested in attending, but we are finalizing our delegation to March of the Living. So March of the Living is going to be in April, and we're going to be in Poland, and then we're going to be in Israel for her 75th birthday. It's more Poland focused. It's just sort of like a taste of Israel, mostly for people who've been there before. But if you're interested in that trip, that's something to let me know of. We've sent out information, but if you haven't seen it or you're kind of just still thinking about it, let me know sooner rather than later. We have so far over 20 people registered for the trip, and we're finishing up with our delegation. Then lastly, and then I'll go to the text, towards the end of November, I forget the precise date, I think it's November 21st, we're having an informational meeting for a summer .rel trip to Israel. So I'm looking around and saying that, Susie's going to the March of the Living with us, so yeah. Oh, good. Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, and that's right. You can, if you want to come and you want to come with someone who's not from a .rel, that's fine as well. The same can be said. So in this coming summer in July, it's a multi-generational trip to Israel. So if you're interested in maybe taking a grandchild to Israel, come. You won't be if you are a grandparent or in the grandparent demographic. We can make the trip workable for you if you're thinking, I don't really want to hike Masada. The truth is no one wants to hike Masada at the end of July. It's just too hot. But the trip is workable for people who are a little bit more seasoned, and very workable. So, but we would love to have you. If you're interested in that trip, we're sending out emails, but let me know. And it's a very workable trip. Now, to vouch on my capacity and abilities as a Israel trip leader, ask Susie Katz, and she'll put you in touch with her son and her daughter-in-law and her granddaughter, who I led a very similar trip about 5 years ago. For their family went to Israel, and we had a great time together. And so Stephen Katz will testify to my abilities to schlep Jews across the land of Israel and not yell at them too much. Okay, so that's the Israel trip. If you know of anyone who'd be interested, or if you have grandkids and you want to take look, I think we're all learning, especially after the past 2 years, and maybe it's not stuff, it's time. Right? Like, the world, stuff doesn't mean anything, it's time. And I try to tell my kids this. They asked me about why I buy the car I buy, because I don't care about stuff, right? I'd rather go and do something with them than care about sitting on a fancier seat. It just doesn't mean anything to me. And I think we're all learning that. Now, obviously, it's different. That idea applies not only to an Israel trip, but if if you have the opportunity to take family members to Israel, it's really a beautiful thing. So anyway, if you're interested in that, let me know. If you're interested in March of the Living, let me know. We'd love to have you. Okay. Tempted by the fruit of another. Get ready for this one. Woo! It's so, this story's crazy. Yes, sir.
3 years ago, we took a full semester class on human sexuality with Rabbi Yarkin, and that was wild.
All right. Rabbi Yarkin doesn't blush easily. I do. No, I don't. So Rabbi Yarkin doesn't. I'm curious to see if this text was in that class, and if you did. Wow. That's right. So everyone. I was going to say, was there a test at the end? Was it like a learn? There's like so much you could do with it. Anyway. Okay, here we go. The Gemara relates. So I apologize. The page numbers got cut off. So I'll let you know what page we are on. Okay, we're on the first page. Kiddushin. The Gemara's. This is the Gemara that the launch point is discussions of marriage. And so not surprisingly, they're now in a discussion about sex. Okay. The Gemara relates. Rabbi Chia bar Ashi was accustomed to say whenever he would fall on his face in prayer, may the merciful one save us from the evil inclination. Okay, period. What is he talking about? Anyone want to guess? What is falling on face mean? Okay, yeah, any thoughts? Oh, we need to use the mic. Okay, use the mic. Okay, we'll give you the mic. Anything? What do you think? What do you think this means? So Rabbi Chia bar Ashi was accustomed to say whenever he would fall on his face, "May the merciful one save us from the evil inclination."
Oops, watch it. Watch Josette's face. Okay, the evil inclination would be to have sex outside of your marriage, be tempted by other women, other men. Outside, if you're not married, to be tempted to have sex.
Sure. Good.
So
You remember the Jimmy Carter thing? Do you remember the Jimmy Carter interview? It was like when he was first running for president, and he said, I lust in my heart, right? And so it's the whole thing here. So is the Yetzer Hara is evil inclination that you should. Yeah, Joette.
Sorry, Rosie. Obviously, this.
I'll repeat it. How about this?
This is referring to sex.
Right.
There's other evil inclinations.
Right.
Aside from sex.
Right. So Joette's saying that this is referring to sex. It is true. And not only just sex. Sex, as Adrian suggested, outside of outside of a legal relationship. Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. So in Judaism, we believe that most human beings are sort of like a suspension bridge. The Yetzer HaTov is a good inclination. It pulls us one way. And it's counterbalanced by Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination that pulls us the other way. And most of us kind of stay in the middle. We all have evil inclinations. We all have good inclinations, and we end up like a suspension bridge. So Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, every day during his tefillah, falling on your face they translated this literally is the Tachanun portion of our service. So this morning at Minyan, we had Tachanun. After the Amidah, there's a point where you have personal prayer, and it's a supplication. It's sort of like the Amidah is sort of, there's 19 blessings. It's kind of laid out fully of what you're supposed to say. Then after the Amidah, there's a point of you put your head down, you rest your head on your non-tefillin hand, and you can offer prayers. And then after we sing, Shomer, Shomer Yisrael. So some of you are familiar with this. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. That's okay. So there's a point of personal supplication. So when Rabbi Chia bar Ashi would arrive at this part of the tefillah, when he put his head down every day, what would he say? He'd say, may the merciful one save us from the evil inclination. May the merciful one save me from Jimmy Carter disease. And we're not talking about the anti-Israel sentiment. I couldn't resist that one. So would the Holy One, would God save me from the Yetzer Hara of sex? Okay, Zissel. Because they don't want to. So Zissel asks a good question. Because do you remember the Seinfeld episode from a few years ago, over 20 years ago? The yada yada yada. And they'd talk about it and yada yada yada, which was sex. So basically, there are words that are signals in any language to certain things that don't have to explicitly be said. And so this is one of those things where they say Yetzer Hara. It could be a whole host of different things. It's clear here it's Yetzer Hara, wink, wink, right? So the question is, why don't they say it explicitly? Because the Gemara, this is the whole issue here. We embrace sexuality, but we don't really embrace it all that much. And you'll see this in the text. Like saying it, there's like dinner table conversation. And, there's things that you say and things that go unsaid. And so here the Gemara is getting a little blushy. Say, okay, everyone will know what I'm talking about. So Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, whenever he when he did Tachanun, he'd fall on his face and he'd say, may God save me from the evil inclination. Yeah, it's us. It's kind of interesting there, right? Good catch. One day his wife heard him. She said, after all, it has been several years since he has withdrawn from me. What is the reason he says this? Basically, she is saying, wait a second. What do you think she's saying? I'll repeat it in the microphone, what you say. Go ahead. What do you think she's saying? She comes across him. He's davening. He's got his tefillin on. He davens the Amidah, puts his head down, and she hears, may God save us from the evil inclination. And she goes, what's happening?
She thinks he's transgressed because he's having evil inclination.
Not quite. Okay, good. It's a good thought. Yeah? She's saying, I thought the reason we weren't having sex, I had to look this up too. So just like that you don't. I thought the reason we weren't having sex all this time was because this is pre-Viagra. I thought like he was done. Like that ship had sailed, our relationship had moved to a different point. I thought that we haven't had sex because, it wasn't because of, he may have wanted to, he just didn't have the get up and go to do it. Yeah, right, exactly. It got up and went and it didn't get up. But that he thought that she thought the problem was a physical problem. And now she hears this prayer and she's like, wait a second. There's not a physical problem here. Something else is going on. Okay, and she says, what is the reason that he says this? In other words, like, something has to be happening here. I don't understand. Now, already, let's think about this couple. the communication is already off. They're lying in the same bed, they share the same house, and there's no intimacy. And she thinks it's for one reason, but clearly something else is going on with her husband. You'll see the divide between them, well, sort of diminish and then sort of grow at the same time. Okay, I want to move on. Lana, go ahead, but go ahead. Last comment.
It could be that he doesn't want to have the evil inclination because he cannot do it, and therefore it's just a frustration thing for him because he gets the urge, but there's not going to be any action.
I have the benefit of knowing the rest of the story, so I know that's not the case. His performance is, he's all right. He checks out. Okay, you ready? Here you go. So she says, what is the reason? So you have to, it's already a tinge sad. Not even a tinge sad. They are not talking to one another. There's already a misunderstanding. One day, while he was studying in his garden, it's already, think, why the garden? Why is that explicitly mentioned? He went out of the house. Good, Rosie. Why did he go out of the house? No, I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to repeat the question. Don't worry about it. Go ahead. Why did he go out of the house? Why do you think? That's right. He went out of the house probably to avoid her. He is saying to God to avoid lustful inclinations because he has a different view of sexuality. And so what he says is, may God save me from the evil inclination. So he averts opportunities to be with her in situations where he may fall, quote unquote, prey to lust. So he goes outside to engage in his study. He leaves his home to avoid his wife because he feels like she is the source of lust, even though the relationship is completely lawful. There's nothing wrong with having sex with your wife. But he thinks that there is. So he has this sort of ascetic notion of sexuality. So he's doing everything he can, changing in the other room. He doesn't want to be attracted to her. He doesn't want to be overcome by his Yetzer Hara. And so he goes outside and studies. Hold on for 1 second, Joette. And he goes to the garden. Garden of Eden imagery is right here. The Garden of Eden imagery for sure. And then there's more Garden of Eden imagery in just a few moments. Go ahead, Joette. Well, you should have been there to give him some advice because this is exactly what happens. He goes to the garden to get out of harm's way, but he actually ends up getting himself in a little bit of trouble. But in the most saddest of ways. He goes out and goes to the garden to learn. Now, also, just think about society then. It's not like today when everyone has their own backyard. Right? Public spaces were much more, shared spaces were much more prevalent. So he's not going to be alone in the garden. But it's sort of interesting. He leaves the safe confines of acceptable sexual relationship to protect himself from something that he fears is not allowed, even though it is. Then he goes outside and inadvertently makes himself more vulnerable to a sexual encounter. And that's exactly what happens.
I guess I'm a little confused. I mean, why would he think that?
It's a good question. So why does he think? So maybe we're not as, so within Jewish, so we say, when I do interreligious dialogue, oh, us Jews, we're comfortable with sexuality. And, and then I kind of give it to the pastor a little bit, give it to the father especially, right? But maybe it's not as clear. maybe there is a comfort but also a discomfort simultaneously with sexuality. I mean, Rav Chia bar Ashi is not a Talmudic lightweight. He's one of the disciples of Rav, who's one of the huge rabbinic scholars in Babylonia. And like, he's not like a sideline figure. So, and then we see that Judaism, look, you see strands of asceticism that permeate most religious practices, and clearly Judaism as well. So he's got an issue. Or maybe he struggles with something else. Maybe it's addiction. Who knows? But it's clear that like, he could have used the benefit of Joette to say, like, dude, what are you doing? Like, it's okay. Like, you're all right. Stay in the house, and like, it's as good. But something's got in his head, and the text actually never clears that up. Like, why this is okay. So one day he was studying in his garden. She, his wife, adorned herself. She changes, she gets dressed up. She gets all verputzt, right? She combs her hair differently. She puts on different makeup. She wears a dress that she hasn't been worn in a long time. She changes her physical appearance. Yes. Oh, can I tell you something, Zissel? So Zissel says he's not very observant. Watch how unobservant he gets. And we're not talking about Shabbos in just a minute. What happens here is, watch what happens here. So she gets all verputzt, and she keeps walking past him because they're in the garden. He said, "Who are you?" She said, "I am Charuta." Think of it as like that was like a figure in Roman cultural circles as like the
Gypsy Rose Lee.
who?
Gypsy Rose Lee.
Right. Gypsy. Who's this?
Gypsy Rose Lee.
Gip. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, but no. Okay. So she's the celebrate. What, stripper? Yeah. I don't watch that kind of movies. I'm just kidding. Okay. Right. So she's the stripper. She's more than the stripper. She's the strip with all the privileges that go with it. So Charuta is a well-known prostitute. So she's basically saying, now the question is, she's like role-playing. Does she think this is a game? Does she think like, we'll spice it up a little bit? I am Charuta, Okay, but maybe she thinks it's a game, because could someone be as unaware as he's going to prove to be? So let's watch what happens. I am Charuta, returning from my day. He propositioned her. He's okay with this. She said to him, "Give me that pomegranate from the top of the tree as payment." She's a prostitute. She wants payment. So here's other Garden of Eden imagery. The tree, and the apple is a Christian thing. Like, that's nowhere to be found. It was not an apple. Maybe it was, like dates or figs, but also in certain Jewish legends, it's a pomegranate, the tree that they ate from, of knowledge of good and evil. And the pomegranate's also fertility, right? It's a sign of the Rimon, the seeds, and fertility. So she says, "Give me that pomegranate from the top of the tree." So is she like playing into stereotypes here? Is she kind of like, is it so exaggerated that she's, she's kind of like, it's like it's like sexual role playing is so exaggerated, it's not real. Is she doing that? And is he in on it? Well, does she think he's in on it? So he leapt up, went and brought it to her. So he can't get the pomegranate fast enough. You know, boom. And then it's yada, yada, yada. Or what was that the thing in Seinfeld when they, you know, dot, dot, dot. Like, it happens. Okay? So they sleep together. Gemara now cuts slightly, you know, next scene. When he came home, his wife was lighting a fire in the oven. Ovens are different than now. They're top loaded, okay? And they're big, kind of big things. Not everyone even had an oven. She's lighting a fire in the oven. He went and sat inside it. He sits inside the oven. Right. Yeah, Herb said, huh? And I said, right. He said, what's going on? I said, right. What is going on? So, is he trying to kill himself? Is he trying to harm himself? She said to him, what is this? He said to her, such and such an incident occurred. Meaning he told her, I was outside in the garden, Charuta came, she was dressed nicely, it was Charuta. I propositioned her, she asked for the pomegranate, yada, 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 and we had sex. She said to him, it was I. It was me. This is what Zissel says. Duh. That was me. Charuta, it was me. He paid no attention to her. She showed him until she gave him signs. Maybe she gave him the pomegranate. She showed, wait, I was there. Look, here's the pomegranate. He said to her, I in any event intended to transgress. Zissel's right. He wasn't involved. He didn't know this was a game. He didn't know it was his wife. They had become so far apart, so distant, he didn't even recognize having sexual relations with his own wife. She thought they were playing a game, and he thought that he had committed adultery. He said to the Gemara then relates it just as the next sentence. All the days of that righteous man he would fast until he died by that death. That's it. Story ends. Reactions to the story, and then we'll have some questions. Maybe Rosie, if you wouldn't mind passing it around now. Reactions or questions, and then we'll do some discussion questions. Did Rabbi Yarkin give you this text?
No.
Is this a little more? It's so sordid, but it's so sad too. It's like terrible. But
well, nowadays, I think nowadays that with the religious Orthodox Jews, the boys and girls aren't even allowed to hold hands until they're betrothed. So they're taught no, 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 and all of a sudden it's acceptable. And going back thousands of years, I imagine it was the same way. A virgin was tantamount for a girl to get married. So it was beholden until you're married, and all of a sudden it's okay, go ahead, you can do it now. So when you're raised one way, and all of a sudden it's not an easy transition, I would imagine.
yeah.
Because I grew up in the 50s, and I was told, this is the 50s as a teenager, nice Jewish girls don't do those things. And I
Yeah.
believed it. Little did I know that a lot of them did. They just didn't talk about it.
Right. And now the
I
kids
really
talk about
bought-
it too much.
Yeah. So this is how I was raised.
Yeah.
So it's different now, and
Yeah.
things are much open and
Right.
it's
Things are much open. The
discussed.
only difference, though, is that they're married. You're right.
Yes.
There is
All
a
of a sudden,
discomfort
yes.
with, from my days in yeshiva, like making eye contact with another person who's of a different gender, and like those things are. Look, I have my critique of it. here what's really hard is they're married. Yeah, presumably for a long time, because they've already been separated for a long time. So it means they were married even longer. And so what's going on in that relationship? Yeah. Of course, social norms have changed. Absolutely.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Go ahead. I don't know. I actually think they have changed. Yeah, I think they've gotten good.
So I'm not sure of the timing, but it was not, I mean, it was frowned upon to have sex outside of marriage, but technically only with someone who was not available.
Right.
A prostitute is available because she's not married.
But he's not. It's still adultery.
No, it's only adultery if he is with someone who he's not permitted to
Right.
be with.
Right, and he's not permitted to be.
No, I mean, if the woman, or at least that's the only way you get a mamzer.
You get a what?
A mamzer.
Right, a mamzer. Right, right. A mom. So there's no such thing in Judaism as a bastard. A mamzer is a product of an illicit relationship. Okay. All right. Good.
So I mean, it seems to me if his wife had engaged with another man,
Right.
that's no.
Right,
but
right.
him engaging with another woman, it's questionable as to whether
Whether
that's
it's right. Whether
forbidden in that
in the same
sense.
light. Okay. Good. Well, he never gets over it. He never gets over it. Yeah.
Well, actually, have a couple problems here. This guy must be so totally distracted by his prayers or whatever he's into that he cannot recognize his wife no matter how she's dressed. I find that either terribly unbelievable or terribly unobservant of that person. He has to be in La La Land
Absolutely. Yeah.
not to know what's going on here.
Yeah.
And I had 2 points and I forgot the other one. Anyhow, I'll make up something else. It's an object lesson, okay?
I'll come back to you when we all forget things, mind you. I don't have anything to say. Anybody else? Okay, Susie, sorry, Rabbi, I have to.
That's okay.
It's not about your questions. What reminds me the story of Ruth,
Yeah.
that how proved that the relationship took place.
Yeah. 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 Do you mean with Judah and Tamar?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So there's another great story in the book of and there's some imagery here that the text is eliciting that intentionally as well. The text is referring to two different biblical incidents. There's sort of kind of like hints of both of them. The first, of course, is the Garden of Eden, the fruit, the garden, and then the other one is the story of Judah. So just as a biblical review, you remember Judah, who is one of Joseph's brothers. This is actually it's like a pause in the Joseph narrative. And often in the Torah, a pause in the main narrative just is a way of like letting time go by. The other way they do it is they introduce a genealogy in the Torah. But anyway, this is a narrative pause. So it's like, hold on, Joseph has to like grow up in Egypt. And so they cut to the second camera and they go to Judah, who has 3 sons. And there is Selah, Onan, and Er. No, Er, Onan, and Selah. And the first son marries this woman named Judah. Marries this woman named Tamar, rather. And he's a bad guy. The Torah doesn't say why, and he dies. Now, this is where the idea of a Levirate marriage comes in. So, Judah, is under pressure now to give his second son to marry this woman to give the second son to marry this woman. And this woman, because that way you are fulfilling your Levirate duties, right? And they still have this, there's a ceremony in Israel that you can go about, so you don't have to fulfill this. But if there's no kids, in order to kind of like keep your brother's home still going, you have kids, but they're credited to your brother. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, Onan decides that he doesn't like that idea. And so, in the midst of intercourse, he pulls out. And from that is coitus interruptus and what's called an onanism in contemporary society. But it's not, and then God kills him. But it's not clear that God kills him that it's wasting seed, or that he was killed because he was so jealous that he didn't want his brother to get progeny. So it's a complicated story. Judah then sees what happens: 2 boys down and no Tamar, and he's got his last son. So he says to Tamar's like, all right, I'm ready for the 3rd boy. Judah says, don't call me, I'll call you. Like, oh yeah, we'll give you a call later on. And so presumably years go by, and Tamar dresses up as a harlot and sits by the road. And she entraps Judah, actually, her father-in-law, thinks she's a prostitute, has sex with her, as payment gives her a sign, a staff with his signet on it, and then Judah hears that so the time passes, Judah hears news that his daughter-in-law has become a prostitute and condemns her to death, and then in public, he says, hey, who did you do this with? And she goes, as a wink wink to him, the owner of this staff was my customer, and it's his staff. Our story from the Talmud has images of that whole story from Judah and Tamar. Okay, that's a side note. Hold on, Zisla, I want to see if anyone else had something. Okay. I want to move on to the discussion questions. But first of all, I have a question. Why do you think, before the discussion questions, what could have the husband done differently? What should have the husband done differently? What should have the wife done differently?
I think the husband should have gone to therapy.
Right. Right.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah. I know you are. You're being serious.
I'm serious about that. That's why Freud was so popular, because Freud is Jewish, and there's so much guilt about sex in all of Freud's writings. So
Yeah.
there's something to say about that.
Yeah. I mean, no.
Freud didn't come till later.
I also wonder, why didn't she talk to him about it? Or did she, why did she not, so I'm not putting all the blame on her, for sure not, but it's just interesting to me that here they are, she thinks there's a physical barrier to intimacy. Then she realizes that it's not a physical barrier, there's something going on with his prayers. So she didn't talk to him about it. Instead, she dresses up. What did she think was going to happen with that? Unless she thought it was just a way of, we'll have some fun, it'll be a game, and then we can laugh about it and talk about it. Maybe it was a prelude to a discussion. But then it gets really sad. His biggest issue may not even be his sex issues, but maybe his lack of knowing his wife, right? Because presumably they could have resolved this whole thing if she dressed up, he laughed, oh, it's my wife, okay, we'll have some fun, and then after on the bed they talk about it and they resolve things. But then he doesn't even recognize her. It's sort of out of left field. How could you not recognize your own wife? Yeah.
And also,
That's a good point. So Joette said he's praying for something, but then he is putting himself in a position that is not a good position to be in, presumably being in the garden. I have to say that's what screamed to me of addict behavior, right? That he's sort of making deals with himself about like boundaries. So he's sort of prudish with his wife, but then he puts himself in the garden. Like it doesn't make sense, right? His behavior doesn't make sense. The addict goes, oh, I'll go to the casino, but I won't gamble. I'll go to the bar, but I won't drink. I'll only have one, and then off to the races. Yeah.
So I think Cecil had a comment or a question.
It seems to me this guy is extremely puritanical.
Yeah.
He's beating up on himself, not for what he did, but what he thought he wanted to do. And that's taking matters to an extreme. You can beg forgiveness for what you do, but to start beating his breast for things he wanted to do in here, but didn't do, he's got a loose screw somewhere.
Right. It's clear there's a few loose screws, but he's also, it's a complicated thing because she's ready to forgive him. She said, no, it was me, but I didn't think it was you. So is it wrong what he did? Did he cheat on her? Yes or no? Like that's the big question. All right, wait, hold on. We're going to have a straw poll. Are you ready? This is like CNN, latest round of polling. All right. Raise your hand. Did he cheat on her? Yes, raise your hand. No, I'm asking, in your mind, I ask questions. Did he cheat on her? Raise your hand, yes. Okay, put your hands down, raise your hand. No, he didn't cheat on her. Interesting. So, right, so she says to him, hey, it was me. So it seems like she's okay with this, but he's not ready to move on. He said, but I meant it. Like I thought I was doing it. So by thinking about it, and then how does that shape the action? And what's complicated here is in Judaism, most cases, with few exceptions, you're not, like the whole Jimmy Carter thing that I alluded to is just not Jewish. There's no lust in your heart. Like we all, like in Judaism, we say, yeah, like that's what being, a heterosexual oriented, like you've had lust for a female, and homosexuals have, like we all have sexual desire, and that's natural. But it's the kind of, so there's nothing, to Jimmy Carter, like to a Jew, it made no sense. Like, what are you talking about? Right, but here it's complicated because he acted on it. Now it was under a different pretense, so does that pretense change it? But he did act on it.
So he had to know, I think he had to reassure himself he could still do it. So Michael has
No, the doing it was never a problem for him. She, his wife, thought it was a problem. She thought we haven't had sex because of physical barriers. That wasn't the problem. He was always trying to contain his physical. They weren't having sex because he thought it was a sin. Michael?
At the very beginning, when he has the prayer, may the merciful one save us from the evil inclination, why did the wife think it was about sex? Could have been any evil inclination.
It could have been, but I think it's like, I think the Gemara is being kind here. I think everyone knew what it meant. Everyone knew what it meant. It was like, okay. Like, it's like when the kids say, here, I'm going to be, that's not crass, but the kids now say, are they going to do it? Do it. Well, that can mean 1,000 things, but it means only one thing. Right. Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
What do you think the reason that the rabbis included this Gemara in there for? It's nonsensical almost. Like it's trying to teach us something, but what is it trying to teach us?
I spent a lot of time thinking about that. There's a scholar of rabbinic literature, Ruth Calderon, in Israel, and she writes a book. She actually wrote a creative story that you would like, Lisa. She wrote a series of creative stories based on Talmudic texts, and this is one. And so she takes this text, and then she writes a short story companion to it. So she embellishes the Gemara is economical with its words, but she writes short stories based on it. It's fascinating. So then why? Well, no one knows why, but what I think that it does in some ways is that it's like, it makes, when people always ask, like, what's the Jewish view of? I hate that question because it's usually complicated. And what I think that this story is, it's just really complicated. So maybe the Gemara is trying to teach that. Maybe this was really well known. Maybe it is to sort of say, okay, we're comfortable with our sexuality, and maybe to condemn him for being prudish, and therefore his prudishness led to bad behavior that ultimately cost him his life. I'm not sure why they included it. They don't write notes on what they included and what they didn't include, but it's a fascinating question. We'll never know the answer to that. Yeah. Bridget, go ahead.
Well, going back to the wife's point of view, I kind of expected her to turn around and say, hey, look, you went after this harlot when you don't go after me. What's going on? And using that as a tool to find out what's going on. But
right.
She didn't do that.
No, she didn't do that. Yeah. It's almost like there is, I talked about in my Yom Kippur sermon, still plugging my materials here, I talked about different types of coping mechanisms. It seems like avoidance is her sort of MO. Like, they don't talk about it. It's just avoiding. And so she dresses up instead of talking to him about it. And then he thinks he did something awful, and she doesn't say, okay, this is now an opportunity for us to talk about it. She's like, no, it's okay. Like, it was me, and all good. Like, we can sweep it under the carpet when clearly the carpet needs some cleaning. Yeah.
When I first was reading it, I was thinking, okay, the guy's got a screw loose. And he probably did, in that somewhere he read something where sex is not a good thing. This is an evil inclination. But when he makes the prayer that not to be involved with his inclination, it may have been a very practical thing by this point. He has been saving up for a long time. And by the time this harlot comes by, he has no choice. It overwhelms him. He's not even going to see his wife. She's just flesh because he's been building up for too long.
Yeah. I mean, instead of saying a screw loose, which is sort of like we're joking around, and I understand that, and I think I even said that, but it seems like he's sick. Like he's troubled, and is she troubled? I kind of think so too.
Yeah, she should just talk to
And
him.
the way of their troubledness leads to the disintegration of their relationship. I mean, the text doesn't even say if he ever came out of his oven. The commentators of the Gemara have a debate. Did he die in the oven? But then they would say no, because then he would have committed suicide. So the comment here, this is what subsequent commentators have an issue with. The next passage calls him a tzaddik, like a righteous person. So how could he be a tzaddik if he killed himself in an oven? Because suicide, according to the rabbis, who had really no understanding of mental illness, would have been a sin. Now, we don't believe that anymore, but they did. So if he would have killed himself, if he had done all these things and then killed himself, they wouldn't have called him a tzaddik. So what they say is then, how did he die? It couldn't have been that he left himself in the oven. So this is just gymnastics here, but what they say is that he burned his feet. He gets out of the oven, he burns his feet, and he passed, because it says here that he died at the end of it. He died until he died until he died by that death. So meaning he died by that death, meaning he had injured. The rabbis say, wait a second, by that death, do you mean that he died in the oven? If he died in the oven, that means he committed suicide. Uh-oh, we can't call him a tzaddik, can't be the answer. So instead they say, no, he actually he burned his legs so badly that he got out of the oven and infection, and then he died. Right. So is he? No, they don't read it that way. So that you're reading it interestingly, Joette. You're saying, right? Did he die because he starved himself to death? Well, it's still an issue then. That's still suicide. Right. So they don't want that. Yeah, but one of your questions in the text says that he did commit suicide. No, these aren't my questions. I copied them. One of the questions. Where is that? Number 7. Well, he's wrong. No. Yeah, so it's not clear that, right, so these are the questions from Rabbi Rubenstein. It's not clear that he commits suicide. I would say that the commentators have a tough position, because if he had committed suicide for them, there was no coming back from that in their mindset. So the commentators go through gymnastics. I kind of think you're right. I agree with Rabbi Rubenstein, but then think that they needed to have a polemic around him to say that he didn't commit suicide. But if he fasted, right. Indirectly. Suicide. Right, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, last comment, and then I've got to go. Oh, yeah, we're late, but that's... Okay, go ahead. Last comment, Bridget. You get the last words.
I think dying by that death, probably he went out with another prostitute and she had a venereal disease, and that's how he died.
Well, it's interesting when you said died by that death. It's not clear what that death is. So maybe he died by the brokenness he connected with his wife. He died by the starvation of this fast. He died by the oven, either incinerating himself or by disease, or he died because he fell into the abyss of addiction. All possible readings.
But it's a sad ending.
It's a tragic.
Real tragic ending.
I only bring tragic endings.
I know, but we want to be uplifted.
Sorry. Okay, here's the uplift. The tragic ending is over. So anyway, I hope everyone has a great day and drive home safely and stay for the afternoon sessions. Okay. The clouds are lifting. When you go in the garden, be careful. You'll see our synagogue prostitute.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. All right.
Okay, we'll see you. We won't see you for 2 weeks. Is that right? Yeah, you're not playing Maj today, and next week you won't be there. So will you be here next Wednesday? So it's 2 weeks. Okay.
Bride for one night. Oh, it's wonderful. Well, it's me, and then she does a little bit of teaching on the Talmud story, and then you would love it. Can I tell you, you should do that as a book club.